When I was a small boy, I remember going to a local shopping mall with my family. And I don't exactly remember what we were there to buy, but I do remember quickly becoming bored, as children tend to do, and wandering off. Frantically, my family began searching for me, terrified that I had been abducted. And when they finally found me, I was in the food court. Some things never change. And I was sitting at a table with a family of complete strangers having a conversation. Because that was who I was, a young boy that didn't know any strangers, that just wanted to be friends with everybody he met. And I couldn't have conceived that these people might be any different from me, because to me they were just people, just as interested in making friends as I was. There's a commonality that exists for all human beings. Whether you're an evangelical Christian from the Bible Belt South in the United States, a Sunni Muslim from the Sudan, an agnostic from Stockholm, or a Catholic from El Salvador, the starting point for all mankind and the foundation upon which we grow is this. First, we're born into a family, we're born into a community, we're born into an economic class, oftentimes a religion. And then, by the age of 2, we become fearless and gregarious little explorers of our starting societal context. Most children, especially the privileged, tend to be this way, I believe, because children are fearless. They simply don't possess any real perception of societal labels or differences. Black, white, Muslim, Christian, gay, straight. We're born oblivious to the societal labels that so divide us later on. Because life at that point isn't about labels. It's about learning. And at that age, we've yet to learn how to be afraid of what's different. Children also seem to possess an innate empathy and goodness towards their peers. When I was a little kid, I used to give away all my toys to my friends because I was the happiest when other people were happy. Likewise, when other people were distressed, I would become distressed. And walking in the shoes of the other, that is, identifying emotionally with them in their pain, was second nature. Because children are the perfect reflection of the mood of their environment. As I've gotten older, I've begun to realize that as we age, we can become so locked in our starting context that we become stagnant. We forget our fearless, empathetic child selves, and we choose only to surround ourselves with those we deem like us or normal. So I want to ask you a question today. Is it possible to relearn this practice of walking in the shoes of the other? That is to say, is it possible to relearn the discipline of intentional empathy? I'm standing on this stage today because I know it is. But what exactly does it mean to practice intentional empathy or to walk in somebody else's shoes? My journey back into practicing intentional empathy is unorthodox for sure. And I'd like to share a little bit about that with you today. I was raised in the Bible Belt south of Nashville, Tennessee, to a hyper-conservative Christian family. My parents didn't believe in public education, so I was homeschooled until the 7th grade. Eventually, I ended up at a small private Christian institution called Pioneer Christian Academy in Whites Creek, Tennessee. My graduating class had 3 guys and 7 girls. So I ran home and had told my parents I was graduating top 10 of my class. They were thrilled. After graduating high school, I attended one of the largest, most conservative evangelical universities in the United States. It's called Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. But it wasn't until after I got home from college and in the years following that I would find myself in one of the most difficult, life-changing situations that I'd ever been in. It was June of 2008. And I was standing on the back patio of my favorite karaoke bar in Nashville. Standing in front of me was a new friend that I had just started to get to know. Her name was Liz. And she looked like she was on the verge of tears. "How can you be a Christian?" she asked me. Before I could come up with any kind of response, she broke down crying. "I came out as a lesbian yesterday to my parents, to my Christian parents, and they disowned me. My dad told me that he would no longer financially support a faggot daughter, and my mom told me that I could come back when I was fixed." She melted into my arms and started sobbing on my shoulder, but instead of empathizing with her and comforting her in her pain as I would have as a child, I started listening to this little voice in my head, this little voice that told me that it was my job to straighten her out, to fix her. It was my job to share those 6 passages in the Bible that I always been taught condemned homosexuality. Thankfully, before I got the chance to say anything, Liz left. And as the door closed behind her, I was stricken with an epiphany. Maybe that voice inside my head that told me to do anything other than be there for her in her pain, to love on her and listen to her, maybe that voice wasn't God. Maybe that voice was the result of 2 decades spent in a hyper-conservative religious bubble. I knew that I needed to figure out what she was going through. I needed to understand. I needed to see how the label of gay would impact my life so I could challenge that voice. So I made an unorthodox, crazy, some would say, decision. I'm a straight man, and I decided in that moment that I would come out as gay to my family, friends, and church. That for a year I would live with the label, and that I would test not only my beliefs, but how strong my social context was. Months later, I would begin to realize that fear. I'd begin to understand my friend as much as a straight man could. As I started coming out to my family, friends, and church. But instead of being met with an uproar of religious rebukes, the response to my declaration was silence. Overnight, I ceased to exist. The vast majority of my community closed their doors on me that day. And it felt as though I had died. And so it was my first true glimpse into not only the power of societal labels, but the fear those labels can create and their ruthless effectiveness in separating us from the other. And so I entered this year of full immersion into a community of people that I had never thought I would know. And I spent as much time with my new tribe as possible. I joined a gay and lesbian softball team. I raised money and participated in an AIDS walk. I volunteered for Gay Pride Day. And I even got a job as a barista in a small cafe located in Nashville's only gay bookstore. The cafe was called Revive, and I can remember vividly filling out the application. You know, applications have that education history section. And as I put down Pioneer Christian Academy and Liberty University, it occurred to me that any manager looking at it would probably just toss it in the garbage. So I drew an arrow out into the margins, and I wrote a little note. Please don't hold this against me. And I drew a little smiley face, because everything is better with smiley faces, I think. The next day, I got a phone call from the manager, and he was laughing. He said, Tim, I'm not going to hold your education history against you. In fact, I want you to come in today for an interview. So that afternoon, I drove down and went in and interviewed, and I got the job with no clue how it would impact my life. A few weeks later, after beginning my job, I was walking outside on a dinner break. Located next to the cafe and the bookstore was an LGBT community center. And on that particular night, They were hosting a gay karaoke night for the community. I walked outside expecting to hear the stereotypical music playing that one would expect to hear from a gay karaoke night. Madonna, Cher, Britney Spears, maybe some Lady Gaga. But what I heard was completely different. I knew the song. I had sung it 1,000 times, but for some reason in that moment, I couldn't put my finger on the title or the words or where I had sung it. So I decided to venture into the community center to check things out. I walked through the first set of double doors, and the music got louder. I walked through the second, and what I saw, I'll never forget. On stage was a man dressed in women's clothing. She looked like a young Barbara Bush. And her hands were raised and her eyes were closed. And I looked around the audience and everybody was doing the exact same thing. And as she hit the chorus, my jaw dropped. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above. With wisdom, power, and love, our God is an awesome God. It's a praise song that I had sung in church. Never in a million years did I think, as a straight Christian undercover in the gay community of Nashville, that I would hear that song. Because I was taught to believe that gay people were godless. Yet there I stood, the normal of my past life, confronting the same normal in a completely different community. As the song finished, part of me hoped it was a fluke, that I wouldn't have to confront the idea or my prejudice that these people might just have the same beliefs that I did. But sure enough, the next song was another praise song, and then another, and then another, and then another. For 30 minutes straight, I listened to one of the most intense worship sessions that I had ever heard. Sensing my shock, a young man walked over to me. "Does this happen often?" I asked him. "Oh, well, most of us go to church together on Sunday morning, so nobody really cares when we start in with the Jesus music." So I walked out of the community center and I walked back to work, and I was overcome with a deep and profound sense of shame. I had always been taught, and I had always taught, that the label of gay and that the label of Christian were mutually exclusive terms, that you could not be both, you were either one or the other. And in that moment, I knew I was wrong. And not only that I was wrong, but that I had believed a vicious and ignorant stereotype that separated me from my neighbor. I realized as well in that moment that my normal and other people's normals are not all that different. And that once and for all, I needed to conquer my prejudice and my bigotry. There were many other watershed moments that I experienced during my year with the label of gay. And I tell all those stories in my book, The Cross in the Closet. If you're interested, check it out. But by the end of the experiment, I had conquered most of my negative notions and stereotypes and beliefs about the LGBT community. And it wasn't until after I had a very negative encounter with a former pastor in a Starbucks that I made a decision towards the end of my year that I was going to go back and visit a church. I'll never forget what it was like pulling into the driveway, parking, and entering this massive space. It was a mega church, and in Nashville, mega churches aren't 200 or 300 people, they're 2,500 to 5,000 people. And I walked through the doors, and something really weird happened. Immediately, every hair on my body began standing on end. I felt defensive and agitated. I walked into the auditorium and I found a seat, and I felt like a trapped, wounded animal. I looked around the room. I saw a bunch of smiling faces making small talk to each other as they found their seats. And I made a decision that if the pastor said anything about tithing or about politics or about homosexuality, I was going to get up and leave and make a huge spectacle. I hated the people in that room, and I didn't know why. And then, just as it had happened, as Liz left karaoke that night, I had an epiphany, another epiphany. Tim, you haven't conquered your prejudice. You've merely switched the object of your prejudice back onto another group of people. I gathered my stuff and I left. I felt toxic. I felt like a failure. And I questioned why if I would ever be able to deal and overcome this systemic need to separate myself from people that were different from me. I got into my car and it hit me. Maybe the biggest hindrance to practicing intentional empathy are our comfort zones, especially when we become stagnant in them. And maybe our sin, if you will, is that our starting context can so often become our identity as opposed to being a launching point for our journey through the human experience. At the end of my year, I was having dinner with my mom, and she said something I'll never forget. She looked at me dead in the eyes and she said, Tim, I don't just think that Satan is the father of lies anymore. I'm starting to think he's the father of labels. And I don't think she could have been more correct. What was once an innate ability wasn't anymore. I found my intentional empathy, but it was in a way I never expected. During my year, I learned many, many lessons. But the most profound lesson that I learned that I'd like to share with you is this. The difference between leading a stagnant, black and white, prejudiced existence and leading a full, vibrant, colorful life is choice. Every day when we get out of our beds, we need to choose to practice intentional empathy. We need to choose to venture outside of our comfort zones. We need to choose to become more holistically full and fulfilled individuals. Only then will we be able to better our communities by closing the gaps that separate us. It isn't just our responsibility as human beings. It's our greatest opportunity to explore the intricate depths and complexities of mankind. And my friends, those intricacies are beautiful. Thank you.